We are the Childhood Collective, and we have helped thousands of overwhelmed parents find joy and confidence in raising their child with ADHD. I'm Katie, a speech language pathologist.
And I'm Lori.
And I'm Mallory, and we're both child psychologists. We combine the science of ADHD with the compassion of moms and bring you practical tools you can start using today.
So hit subscribe and let's help your family shine with ADHD. Today, Katie and I are so excited to welcome Dr. Carrie Jackson to the podcast. Dr. Carrie is a licensed child psychologist based in San Diego, California. She enjoys working with families, children, and teens with ADHD in her private practice. We love that she shares evidence-based information online for families to easily access. In her free time, Dr. Carrie enjoys staying active and trying new restaurants.
And Dr. Carrie, you're always posting these lovely photos of your hikes, everything you're doing in Southern California, and really all around the world lately. So we really love seeing all of your adventures. And thank you so much for being here today, just talking with us all about ADHD in tweens and teens.
Thank you both for having me today. I mean, I love being able to follow y'all also because y'all are my neighbors right over in Arizona, just a little bit hotter than California, unfortunately. So not as much time for the nice outdoor activities there.
Absolutely.
Yes,
and there's no beach. So I don't know what we were thinking, but yeah, you definitely have a good deal over there. So that's great. But we're just really glad to have you here. So thanks for being here.
Yes. And so why don't we get started and have you share a little with us about yourself? Like, how did you get to this point of expertise with helping families raising teens and tweens with ADHD?
Of course, yeah. So I am a licensed psychologist, just like I know several of you guys are too. And a lot of the people who we know through Instagram and social media that are supporting kids and parents and families with ADHD. So I feel like for me, my focus on ADHD really started when I was in grad school, but it was because I was introduced to the idea of working with parents to help their kids. And even though that idea I feel like sounds so like simple to us, like, you know, as professionals, it's a really new idea where a lot of parents don't realize that to support their kids, they are the ones who are actually participating and learning a lot of these new skills. So I started by working with parents, and then I was just amazed at how quickly you were able to see some of these like changes and supporting of the kids. And so from there, it kind of really just took off into working with like kids and teens who have ADHD. So, you know, I feel like they are a group who they just don't get enough support. And it's one that I found that I really, really do love. And I also have been diagnosed with ADHD. And so I just remember being a kid, being a tween with ADHD and all of the challenges that came up with it. So to be able to offer that support now to the parents and the tweens is really something I love to do.
Yeah, that's so amazing that you have both kind of perspectives of like going through it yourself and then being able to help other families. I know when we've worked with families in therapy, like you said, so many parents come in and they're like expecting an experience of drop my kiddo off and they get their therapy and they get better. And it doesn't usually work like that. It's a lot of working with the parents themselves, and they're not always expecting that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not always expecting it, but one of the best ways to actually support your kids, I think, and to learn to be an advocate for them.
Yeah. Definitely. I appreciate that so much. And so when we talked with Dr. Carrie about coming on the podcast, one of the things that we get so many questions about is, you know, our account and a lot of our services really focus on those elementary years, starting at age 4, all the way up maybe through like age 11-ish. But after that, things really start to change. And so Carrie actually has a lot of experience with the tweens and teens. And that's really the thing that we had asked her to speak about today. And Carrie, we're really excited. So I wanted to start with a question just for all those people who are listening, and maybe you have a child who's becoming a tween or is already a tween or a teenager. But they say, you know, parenting doesn't really get easier as your kids get older. It just really changes over time. And in your practice, in your experience with families, what are some of those challenges that you see coming up for tweens and teens with ADHD as they get older?
Well, I love how you said that it doesn't get easier, it just changes. And so I really think it's the same with parenting a tween or a teen with ADHD, where you're facing a lot of the same challenges, but they just look a little bit different when you have a tween or a teen. So a lot of parents of like younger kids, they talk about challenges with motivation. And I think that becomes even more apparent when kids grow up because it's like, now you're seeing the challenges with motivation and schoolwork even more so, where it's like, how do we get them to initiate things by themselves and launch into the future as these independent, kids and tweens and adults someday? And like that independence piece, I think is also there when you're working with kids, but for some reason, like once they become like tweens and teenagers, it's like they really want that independence, but they struggle with getting that independence themselves. There's often this mismatch where there's a lot of tweens and teens who are like, I want to do it by myself, but then they can't, or parents see that they can't do it. And so how to support that as a parent of a tween is really tough.
Yeah, I remember working in a middle school doing groups with kids, and they'd be like talking about the gangs that they were in and like all these like really heavy topics, and then like they'd also want to play duck duck goose.
Oh my
So
Yes.
goodness.
I always felt like that was such a funny thing with like that in between age where they want to be kind of grown-ups, but they're still kids. And it's just hard with parenting and working with that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like I was reading something and it was like, parenting, your whole goal is for your child to not really need you in the same way anymore. And then the hardest part of that is kind of accepting when that happens and they get to that place of independence. And so I think that's such an interesting thing. And when we think of like younger kids, we always, again, have that same goal of wanting them to become more and more independent. But I think that even with your example of school, there's so much more structure at school when they're younger, right? They're in the same classroom. They have one teacher typically, and maybe a planner that all the kids are filling out, and someone's like stamping the planner. That's what happens with my kids' school. And so there's sort of this built in, almost like net, right? That is going to help them and support them. And what we expect to see a lot of times is that kids start to do that more independently. With ADHD, we have these delays in executive function, and we don't necessarily see that independence coming forward. But as we say that, the scaffolding can fall apart, right? Because we now don't, they have four teachers and a locker, and they have to bring books home, and there isn't like one overarching planner or a check person for the planner. So I can see how that's just a natural sort of shift for kids as the expectation really increases, but maybe they're not quite ready at that point.
Right. It's like the demands are increasing every single year with all of those
Yeah.
classes, all those expectations. So for teens to be able to catch up to that with their executive functioning is super difficult. A lot of the times for them to manage that. And also one thing that comes up a lot with families with tweens that parents really start to notice if they have a tween and then a younger child, if the tween has been diagnosed with ADHD, they might see that the tween is doing similar things in terms of independence as their younger child. And so that doesn't always make sense to the parents where they're like, wait, but I feel like my tween should be able to do more at this point and they aren't.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yeah, something I see a lot in my private practice is teens really not accepting help from their parents as they get older. And I'm sure our listeners are wondering, what should parents do when their teen clearly needs help with those executive functioning skills, but they're giving you a lot of pushback on any kind of support in that area?
Yeah, so that is definitely a big challenge, right? Like so many parents, they ask me too, they're like, what do I do when my child tween doesn't want help? And I think one of the important things to realize is that, yes, they are becoming more independent, but there are still ways that they are likely looking for the support from parents. And so when your teen or your tween, they express any like challenge that they're having, a lot of the times parents, they want to jump in to problem solve for them and to support them. And that's not always the best solution because it does lead to a lot of like pushback and fights and arguments if you automatically jump into that solution focused help. So one of the goals is to really help your tween, your child, your teen come up with the solutions themselves before you jump in. That's how they will be able to learn to like fix and find solutions to their problems themselves, even when they don't necessarily see that they are having a problem. If you're able to like put it back on them to look for the solution, then they can start to think like, okay, this is what I might do in this situation if something like that would come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
I
love
love
that.
that. Yeah, that is so powerful. And I think it's really hard for parents. We hear you say that. And even myself as a mom, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Carrie, that is brilliant. And then my kid is going to come home and be like, I got left out on the playground, or I didn't get a swing, or whatever that dynamic is, right? She's 8. And what am I going to do? I'm going to start to problem solve for her. Well, what if you asked Naomi if you could? Immediately my strategy, and it's out of love, right? It comes from such a place of like love and desire to help our kids and for them to be successful. And I just know that for myself, and probably for so many parents listening, you're like a little convicted going like, yep, I totally do that. But it's hard. I think that's so tricky to stop and pause and wait and, kind of help them, give them the space to problem solve. Do you have like a specific, I don't know the right word. Do you have a specific way that you encourage parents, like as they're helping their child problem solve? Do you have any sort of like a system, or what would that look like?
Yeah, I do have like a couple of different things I suggest parents do. And like the first is like to stop and validate them before you move into the problem solving. I think that can be a nice way of pausing for yourself before you just move into like, how can we fix this?
Mm-hmm.
So just saying like, I understand that sounds like it's really tough that you got left out on the playground today. That is a pause where you're acknowledging for your child that it was hard for them. Then in that situation, I think it's really important for parents to ask permission to give advice or to jump into problem solve before they just jump into it. So that might look like asking, do you want me to share some advice or what I might do in this situation? Or do you just want me to listen? That way you're getting that permission from the team because they might not want your advice in that moment or your solutions, and that's okay.
Absolutely. I think of my own relationship with my husband, even.
Yeah.
And like, I'm literally telling him about my, crisis that I'm having. And he loves to jump to that problem solving. And we actually have worked on this in marriage therapy. And that's exactly what our counselor told us is like, you need to kind of, he didn't call it asking for permission. I love asking for permission. That sounds like a really nice way to package that concept. But he would talk about like, what is it that you need from me right now? Like, are you looking for a sounding board? Do you want my suggestions? 9 times out of 10, it's like, no, thank you. I do
Yes.
not need any suggestions. But I love that because I think that's really at the heart of a relationship is like showing up for that person, how they need you in that moment, which is so much easier to sit here and talk about on our
Yep.
podcast than it is to do it in real life. Like, wow.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
got the same advice in our marriage therapy too. So
It's lovely, right?
I know, right? It's funny because I was talking to a parent of a teen with ADHD the other day, and she was kind of saying, "Oh my gosh, like their major issue was like she won't wake up in the morning and she's late for school every single day and it takes too long to get ready and all of the things." And she's like, well, what do I say or what do I do in those moments? And it's like, well, it's not, the change isn't going to happen in that moment. Like, right. You can't like fix it in that moment, in that morning, but having that conversation, like at a different time to create a plan that they're creating with you is the better way to do it to prevent it in the future. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard to do.
You're right. In the moment, sometimes there is no solution. And
Right.
also, like, even asking permission, or sometimes when you share the solutions, they're not going to work. But that doesn't mean that, like, the strategies you're doing as a parent aren't helpful. And it's just sometimes finding the right time to, like, pre plan those things and, like, to collaboratively problem solve. It's like also what I talked about with parents is like, you are not just telling your child what to do, they're coming up with the solutions alongside with you so that it will be a plan that will hopefully work for everyone going forward, no matter if it's getting out of bed, showering at night too, or in the morning, getting homework done. all of those challenges definitely are more like collaborative when they become tweens.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a question for you related to like organizational skills training with teens. And if you could kind of talk a little bit about what that is and what that looks like and why that would be helpful for teens and tweens with ADHD.
Yeah. So, as an overview, like organizational skills training is just helping teens get organized with like typically homework, their book bag, their assignments at school. And with teens, it can look different for every teen because, as I'm sure you guys know, like how kids are getting their assignments, turning them in, getting all their materials varies so much based on schools and classes. So, it's really challenging, I think, as a teen to be able to know how they can plan for assignments when it's different for every single class that they have. So, what it might look like is like coming up with a plan with the teen, the tween, or the family together on how they will set up a system for monitoring assignments, whether that's each Sunday, we're going to check what we have due for the week and then on our calendar, write what we're going to do. Or it might even look like having regular organizational checkups where it's like, okay, we've got our book bag where there are all these papers falling in and out of it. Let's put them once a week where they're actually like together. But also with tweens, a lot of the organization is now online, like Google Drive and Google Classroom. So some tweens that I've worked with, it's like once a week, they will organize their Google Drive or their Google Classroom and look at their assignments. It's just all becoming so much more digital and electronic now.
Right. And we're over here like, I don't remember my password. And how do I use this newfangled contraption? I feel like I'm 100 years old when I try to help my kids with like their online readings, which is a whole nother, I mean, that's a whole nother challenge, right? But I had a question about that. I love how you explained organizational skills training, and it's like a buzzword, right, that a lot of people will hear. It might be on your child's IEP, but one of the things that I do think starts to look a little bit different with teaching skills, right, because this is what we're all about at the heart of all of everything we produce and everything I've seen you produce, Carrie. It's all like, hey, we need to treat the skills, teach the skills, help kids build up from where they're at. And a big piece of that, we're all in agreement, is using rewards, right? And when you use rewards strategically and appropriately, like putting TV at the end of homework, for example, it can be a really big motivator. So how does that start to look different for tweens and teens? I mean, do you still use rewards? Do you call it a reward, or is it like a different, what does that look like?
I call it like incentives or privileges, you know,
like
and
privileges.
it's,
Okay.
yeah, privileges. It seems more like adult and like teen like. And I use them a lot differently, I think, with tweens and teens, because like with kids, like a lot of times you have like sticker charts that you can use, which work great, or other types of rewards. But once they become a tween, it's more about teaching them to structure their responsibilities before their fun activities. So I'll have the teens, tweens, and parents come up with like a list of like privileges and fun activities that must wait to be done and to be enjoyed after they have done their responsibilities. So it's really about structuring what they have to do before they are able to access the fun things that they do need to do. So I don't even really talk about them as rewards, just like it's like the way your responsibilities are structured now. We're just changing it so that you can have more time to enjoy them too.
Ooh, I like that. That sort of like implicit payout is the faster that we finish this homework or whatever, we have more time to go play baseball. I love that. I think that's really significant. And I think for parents, you know, rewards are kind of like a little bit of a taboo word right now. Like there's a lot of accounts out there that say if you reward your child for doing something, they will never do it on their own ever again, right? That's like kind of the extreme version. And I think it's confusing because, you know, we get rewarded. Like when I go to work and I get a paycheck, if I stopped getting a paycheck, I would stop working, right? Like that wouldn't be rewarding enough for me to put in that time. And so it's like sort of in a lot of ways, our whole society is built around this idea of like you get the hard stuff done and then you get to celebrate with something fun. And I love that you're thinking about how to make it a little bit more independent for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same. I think that's really important, like how you framed it as like we all have rewards. And like as adults, I think that's one of the things that really helps adults with ADHD too, is just when they're able to learn, like I reward myself with something I enjoy after doing a responsibility. So like I reward myself with watching trash TV after I do a report or do
Yep.
my
Yeah,
documentation. Yeah.
definitely. And
I
I
know. And
think
it's,
that, oh,
oh,
go
I
ahead.
was going to say, it's a skill that I wish somebody had taught me at that age, to be honest. Like, I look at my husband who, like, just really kind of naturally does that. And I don't. Like, I am all about immediate gratification. Like, I will watch the trash TV and then I'll be like, oh no, I have a report due in an hour.
Same.
Same.
So it is like, it really is a skill that you have to like practice and get in the habit of. And a lot of us don't naturally do that.
No, because it's more fun to watch trash TV often than it is to do our responsibilities. And that's helpful also for parents to see that it's like this is a very natural thing. It's like your child is not trying to be like unmotivated. They probably just like are struggling with that task initiation that doesn't come naturally for many people.
Yep.
Absolutely. And something that I've seen you talk about a lot on your account too is the idea of like when you're parenting a child with ADHD, there's a very good chance that you yourself or your partner has ADHD. And I love how you really talk about like the whole family system, right? Like I remember this one reel you did where it was like parents are going to use a calendar to help their kid get organized, but then they realize like, oh my gosh, I don't use calendars for my own self or something. It was so funny. And I think it's just really important for all of us to be aware of that if we're raising kids or tweens or teens with ADHD, that there's most likely going to be ADHD, in other parts of the family. And so kind of again, like whatever is going to be helpful to your teen can also be helpful for yourself. And like Lori's reports example, like as you teach your kids to do that, trying those things for yourself and seeing what works. But I don't know, I love the message of just like collaborating because I think that's
Yeah.
so huge. And we always talk about like you don't want to send your kid off to college with a sticker chart, and the only way for that to be the case is for them to get on board and learn what works best for their brain and how they do the best. I think that's such a huge piece. So I feel
Yeah.
like you've already kind of expressed like different ways that parents can parent differently. So leaning into that connection is really big. Pausing before we give advice or like solving our tweens or teens problem, and then just a lot of this organizational piece and teaching them to schedule their time. Is there anything we're missing? Is there any other pieces of advice that you have for parents of tweens that you would say, like, what you were doing when they were a child needs to sort of evolve a little bit?
I think the biggest thing is like realizing a lot of the skills you learned like when you were parenting a younger child, they will still apply to your tween and your teen.
Hmm.
They just look differently. So all of the things around building connection, really noticing their strengths, also trying to motivate them with incentives or privileges, they are huge still. It's just going to look different. I would say like the one piece that is often like much more different with tweens and teens is like really finding like the amount of monitoring that parents need to do for their kids. Whereas like with younger kids, there's inherently some more like monitoring and oversight by the parents. But then when kids become tweens and teens, they're starting to branch out with their friends more, make their own decisions. And so I look at like how much input and monitoring that a parent provides to a tween as being something that can like ebb and flow just depending on how their tween is doing, where it's like they're really struggling and getting stuff turned in at school or homework. That's a time where we can up the monitoring and the help and support a little bit more. And then if they're doing really well, we can dial it back, just like give them some more of that leeway where they can do things on their own. So that I think comes into play like a lot more. But so many of the skills are very similar to the things that you guys share on your page, which is huge.
Yeah. And I feel like with that ebbing and flowing, many of the teens that I've worked with in the past, like they're really motivated at the beginning of the school year. They got the
Yes.
planner. They're going to do really well. They're going to be successful. And then like, a few months into that, the motivation is starting to fade. So I think at this point in the year, in the spring, there's probably a little bit more of that monitoring that's needed.
Oh, yeah. It's like
Yeah.
senioritis right now for all
Yeah.
of the kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And us a
And
little bit
teachers.
too.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to
Yes.
pack any more school lunches. I'm ready for
Yep.
a little break. Yeah, but I think that's actually a really good point with the ebb and flow and kind of recognizing as parents, like those moments that do feel really hard, like you're just really discouraged or your teen or tween is having really big emotions. recognizing, that this too shall pass. And I think that it's a good reminder on both sides, like as our support has to increase or decrease over time, that's really important. But also like keeping in our own mind, like, okay, this isn't forever. These hard seasons aren't forever. And that's huge. I just feel like it's such a dose of encouragement to anyone that's parenting a tween right now and is just like overwhelmed. It can be really hard.
Normalize the ebb and flow and don't look at it as like a setback, because it really is more normal to see those changes than it is to see like you've tried all these skills and now everything's fixed and great. Like that's not the case typically.
No. Well, Carrie, this was so helpful. If our listeners want to learn more from you, where can they find you, and what type of extra support do you offer?
Of course, yeah. So I've had so much fun today, but everyone can find me on Instagram and TikTok right now. My username is the same. It's dr.Carrie Jackson, and I know you guys will link it.
Yep.
But for parents of tweens and teens, I also have a free parenting guide if you're looking for how you support your emerging tween and teen with some skills. And I also have a free course, not a free course. I also have a course for parents of tweens and teens who have ADHD, and it has skills for the tweens as well as the parents.
I love it. That's great. And all those links will be in the show notes. So if anyone is interested in checking that out further, make sure you go ahead and give Dr. Carrie a follow. We are so thankful that you came on today, Carrie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for listening to Shining with ADHD by your hosts, Lori, Katie, and Mallory of the Childhood Collective. If you enjoyed this episode, please like this video and hit subscribe so you can be the first to know when a new episode airs.
If you are looking for links and resources mentioned in this episode, you can always find those in the show notes. See you next time.